Los Angeles, and we are, as always, produced by Cam Smith here on Fancred, Sports by Brooks on Fancred. We do this every Monday through Friday, beginning at noon Eastern time. Great show today. We'll go down to the Senior Bowl. Man, there's a lot flying around down there in Mobile, Alabama. We'll talk to friend of the show, Matt Lombardo, New York Giants beat reporter, and we'll talk to him about some of these hires that are reportedly going down to the Giants staff. Guys like Jason Garrett, Freddie Kitchens, Brett Bielema. Yuck. So we'll talk about what's going on with the Giants with Matt. And if you watch this show, you know a lot about the New York Giants because Matt's one of the best in the business. Plus, we'll talk about the Giants pick in the first round pick, at least in the upcoming draft, what their strategy is. And we'll get his perspective on guys like Utah State quarterback Jordan Love, who is all of a sudden coming out of nowhere and causing comparisons to guys like Patrick Mahomes. That's a quarterback out of Utah State, Jordan Love. So that's coming up here just in a minute or two. Matt Lombardo will join us from the Senior Bowl. And then later on in the show, Mike Giardi of NFL Network will stop by, and we'll talk a lot about what's going on with the Patriots and with Tom Brady and Bob Kraft. There's a new video out. If you haven't seen it, you will see it on this show coming up. Bob Kraft was asked by, of course, TMZ. They're out front really on the sports that matter, the sports stories that matter. We talked to Robert Littell about it last week of TMZ Sports. Evan Rosenblum were with those guys. They tracked down another big story being completely ignored by ESPN and everybody else. But Bob Kraft is now weighed in on what his thoughts are about bringing Tom Brady back. We'll have that video for you coming up later in the show, and we'll talk to Mike Giardi about that. Some of the other rumors involving Tom Brady, Jimmy Garoppolo, what he thinks about Garoppolo, of course, former Patriot going into the Super Bowl against the Chiefs. We'll get his breakdown of the Super Bowl. But before we go anywhere with that stuff, the big story coming out of yesterday is the brawl that took place last night, and we've got full coverage of it between Kansas and Kansas State, and we want to get that first clip up. Cam Smith, our producer, the video of the brawl, which began after the game immediately ended between Kansas and Kansas State at Allen Fieldhouse in Lawrence after Kansas State stole the basketball as the clock was running out. KU with a big victory over Kansas State, and here's what happened.
To finish, and DeSouza blocks it, and now the bench is empty. Just unnecessary.
Yep. That's not good. This is bad.
This is bad.
This is
no good. Oh, this is terrible.
There are going to be ramifications for this going forward.
And it's just no point to it. Yeah, that is not acceptable.
I would get my team to the locker room right now. There were definitely punches thrown.
Yeah.
These officials cannot leave the floor until they sort this out. And this could have ramifications going forward for both teams.
Yeah.
So that all stems from DeJuan Gordon of Kansas State, as you just saw in the video, stealing the basketball as time was running out, as Kansas State getting blown out by Kansas at Allen Fieldhouse in Lawrence. And in attempting to make the dunk, you see the spike, a volleyball spike by Silvio D'Souza, and then D'Souza flexing, standing over Gordon, and that's when all hell breaks loose. And eventually there was a chair raised. It looked like something right out of the WWE. So we have a report from courtside as that was happening from Tyler Griever of WIBW. He is the sports director in Topeka, Kansas, and covers Kansas State and Kansas, which is right in the middle Topeka of those two schools. So let's go to that report from Tyler Griever of WIBW.
Yeah, Melissa, as you mentioned, this happened as time expired, and this was a forgettable basketball game. KU wins 81-60, but no one will remember the final score because of an unforgettable ending that is unforgettable in the worst possible way, and it was due to a sequence that really just should not have happened. The final out are usually nothing to report on, but Dejuan Gordon's steal, Silvio De Sousa's block, and De Sousa's taunt changed everything tonight. After that sequence, a brawl broke out. Now, both head coaches, Bruce Weber and Bill Self, say they didn't see how exactly everything started, but here are their opinions sequence leading to the brawl.
It's probably my fault. But I had told them not to press. I had told them not to foul. I told them back off. But the kids are young guys. They want to play hard.
I'm not sure that it's the right thing to do, but I'm not going to place any blame on Gordon going and taking this ball. I mean, Silvio he was being defended, and he took his ball, and certainly the way Silvio reacted to him taking this ball, going down and blocking the shot, that's all fair game. The corn hadn't gone off yet. But then what transpired after that is obviously what set everything off. You've been in enough situations and enough hostile environments and things like that.
Where's the chair?
Where's the
chair comes out of nowhere.
At you towards the end of the game.
No players from either team were made available to the media after the game tonight. So here are Weber and Self describing what they told their players in the locker room.
We talked to them and
So what I want to do is I want to go back to Bill Self. Specifically, he was asked about the play involving a Kansas State basketball player, DeJuan Gordon. So if we could run the clip of Bill Self, and we also have a comment from Bruce Weber from that post-game press conference that I think goes a little bit further than that report.
Players to back off more at the end of the game. Bill, Bruce Weber said in hindsight he wishes he would have told his players to back off more at the end of the game. Do you take any exception to the way they ended the game, playing until the final second?
I think it's a little bit different because we've had multiple issues with K-State on this front. I think it was a little bit different if you have the lead and the other team quits guarding. Obviously, you don't go score. If the team is behind and you teach your kids to play to the whistle or play the possession, I don't think that you should take total offense to anything that transpires. I'm not sure that it's the right thing to do, but I'm not going to place any blame on Gordon going and taking this ball. I mean, Silvio he was being defended, and he took his ball, and certainly the way Silvio reacted to him taking this ball, going down and blocking the shot, that's all fair game. The corn hadn't gone off yet. But then what transpired after that is obviously what set everything off. So I'm not going to take offense to that at all. Do I think it's right? Probably just depends on the situation, but you've been in enough situations and enough hostile environments and things like that you should be mature enough to handle it, whatever's thrown at you towards the end of the game.
You win with class, you lose with class. Disappointed.
It's the Kansas State coach Bruce Weber.
Happen at the end, and that's all I can say. It's probably my fault. But I had told them not to press. I had told them not to foul. I told them back off. But the kids are young guys. They want to play hard. They were disappointed, frustrated. Played. You don't want to take that fire out of their belly, but at the same time, you got to handle it right, and it created I guess a bad thing. But again, credit to Kansas. They kicked our butts.
Yeah, I don't know what to say. It's you can understand where Gordon. I really don't. You can understand where Gordon is coming from. Frustrated. They've been blown out. They've been embarrassed, and so taking out his frustration on that last play, and then I think it's pretty clear that De Sousa went way, way, way too far, and you kind of wonder where that comes from. We've got these authority figures in front of us, and ultimately these guys are accountable. Of course, they won't be held accountable. By the way, it's amazing how Bill Self's hairpiece stays perfectly in place. And if you go to Twitter and see all of the tweets about this, half of the tweets are about whatever it is, the preparation or the super glue that he uses, the space age compound to keep his hairpiece in place. It really, really is phenomenal. But so we've given you full coverage on that. I mean, what is there else to say? I mean, the sad part is the guys who should be held accountable, the guy who should be really suspended and punished the most is Bill Self, but he's the last guy who's going to be punished or at least be held accountable in this situation. So coming up, we're going to talk to Matt Lombardo from the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama, and we're going to talk about a team that, and one of the reasons why we have him on, and it's a little bit like the guys that we bring on from the New England market, who Mike Giardi will join us from NFL Network coming up, and from Cleveland, and from certain other places. These are the teams, I think, that are the most intriguing that you want to follow, and that's why we bring Matt back, and he's so good on the NFL in general. So we're going to get into what Joe Judge, the former New England Patriots special team coach, has now been doing with the Giants as the head coach there, bringing in experienced people, reportedly Jason Garrett as perhaps the guy on the offensive side of the ball. Then you look at Brett Bielema, you look at a Freddie Kitchens. What the hell is going on with the Giants? What the hell are they going to do with the fourth pick in the draft? Those are big questions. What's going to happen to Daniel Jones, in terms of what his future is with the organization? So we're going to do that coming up with Matt Lombardo. And then, of course, as we mentioned before, we'll talk to Mike Giardi, and we'll talk to him primarily about what's going on with the Patriots and also what he thinks of the Super Bowl. Having looked at some of the breakdowns of Jimmy Garoppolo just in the last 24 hours, something really caught my eye from Dan Orlovsky, who, of course, is a friend of the show, has been on this show as well, here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. You see Dan. I mean, Dan is everywhere. He's on ESPN's Get Up, ESPN's First Take, and a well-known in-game analyst for college football for ESPN, and a guy I think you're going to see on NFL games soon. And I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up perhaps on Monday Night Football, or if ESPN is able to whisk that Sunday NFL package away from CBS. I think one of the first people that ESPN, Disney, ABC would install on those Sunday games, the games that they have, would be Dan Orlovsky. Of course, there's also been rumors that Orlovsky, you probably don't know this because it's not being reported because he's on ESPN, and you would only hear this perhaps from an ESPN, but Orlovsky has been in conversation with NFL teams about coaching. So, we'll have to see how that goes. I've actually talked to Dan personally about him coaching at UConn, perhaps where he was a quarterback. But the reason I bring his name up is he had a particularly interesting remark on Twitter that really kind of undercut my whole thought process about this game coming up between the 49ers and the Chiefs. And that is that Dan went back and he looked at every fourth quarter performance of Jimmy Garoppolo on film. And so having looked at all of those, by the way, Cam, I got your message and thanks. It looks like we're going to shift Matt Lombardo perhaps to tomorrow or the next day, but we may still revisit and continue to revisit this college basketball stuff involving Kansas and Kansas State. So stand by for that as we continue to talk about the Super Bowl in relation to Jimmy Garoppolo from the observations of Dan Orlovsky. And in addition, I have something else I want to show you that's fascinating. That's probably the most notable thing I've seen out there today as it pertains to the Super Bowl, in particular the 49ers. But Orlovsky makes the point that he had looked at all of the fourth quarter performances of Jimmy Garoppolo. And he was so impressed that he asked the stats guys at ESPN, and God knows there's a lot of them, what was Garoppolo's QBR, quarterback rating, in the fourth quarter of games this season, and what was the ranking of that amongst all NFL quarterbacks. And as it turns out, thanks to Dan Orlovsky, friend of Sports by Brooks on Fancred of this show, that Jimmy Garoppolo has the highest quarterback rating in the NFL for the fourth quarter of games this season. Remarkable, amazing. And, and I think it really speaks to, just how ahead of the game it appears that the 49ers may actually be. And when you think about, that really made me rethink my assessment of the 49ers, not just in terms of this game, but in the future. When you look at, and I'm going to tip you off to something, folks. I'm going to tip you off. Remember this day, whatever the date is. Let me look. What is the date? January 22nd, 2020. Never forget it. Because on January 22nd, 2020, you were told by Brooks Melchior from Los Angeles on Sports by Brooks on Fancred that the 49ers and Kyle Shanahan are going to go on a run that will include Super Bowls over the next 10 years that will be right up there with the Patriots. In my opinion, based on what I've seen, the defense that they have built and what Shanahan has done with that offense and the pedigree of Shanahan as it relates to his father, Mike Shanahan, and what he was able to do, providing the only Super Bowl run of the Broncos, and of course the Super Bowls that helped John Elway get those rings and really consummate his career and establish his legacy in the pantheon of all-time NFL greats. When you look at that and you look at how the 49ers are running a very similar zone block scheme with the offensive line, the same kind of scheme that, if you think back to the Broncos, right, helped that team immeasurably, helped Elway immeasurably because of the consistency that it provided the run game. And so with the Broncos, back when Mike Shanahan was coaching there, and this resulted in Super Bowls, you saw a team that had the ability to plug in running backs, and it didn't really matter who they were. And I know this isn't all that different from what happens with other teams necessarily, but particularly the strength of the Broncos under Mike Shanahan with his own block scheme was that you could put any guy back there and he would become a star, exactly in the way we saw Raheem Mostert perform in the last game for the 49ers. This out of nowhere performance. But if you understand what Shanahan and San Francisco has done and what his father was able to do at the highest level, winning Super Bowls, that's not really a surprise. It isn't. And now when I think about Orlovsky's breakdown of Jimmy Garoppolo and the fact that Garoppolo has this unbelievable quarterback rating in the fourth quarter of games, and the restraint, I hate to use that word in the context of this analysis, but the restraint that Kyle Shanahan has shown in keeping the cards close to his vest when the run game has worked and the defense has done their thing for the 49ers. Mind you, when I've predicted to you that I think the next dynasty in the NFL is not going to be the Chiefs, it's going to be the 49ers, I've left out the defense. That's the irony of my presentation to you in this situation, because the defense of course, is the strength of the 49ers. At least that's the perception right now. The fact that they're able to build a defense in the way that they have, what they have there, and particularly when you watch the 49ers, and I hope you do this when you watch the Super Bowl, when you think about hard hitting, right? Physical foot, good God, is that a cliche? Is that something that makes you want to tune out, right? But if there's a team that is noticeable in that regard, it's the 49ers, especially on defense, on every play. That's something you see the 49ers doing. And when you're attuned to it, you notice it, right? But even if you aren't attuned, they're one of the few teams, the Niners, that stick out as a football team that is so physical that even a layman fan it can see it on a consistent basis. That's extremely rare, at least in my experience. So when you think about what they've been able to do, Kyle Shanahan as the head coach has been able to get the right staff in place on defense, and the personnel that they put in place, and John Lynch, of course, a big part of that. Where did John Lynch make his bones as a player? Why is John Lynch with San Francisco in the position that he is in? Because of John Lynch's experience on the field as a great player under who? Mike Shanahan, winning Super Bowls under the, the schemes that I just described, that helped establish the Broncos' only dynasty. And many of those schemes now are being used, and principles are being used behind the scenes by Lynch and by Kyle Shanahan to do what they're doing here. So that is all that plays into what I'm telling you about the future of the NFL and as it pertains to the 49ers. We have been efforting, perhaps expanding our coverage of that basketball brawl between Kansas State and Kansas. And just check it in, Cam, to see where we are on that. If we're going to have a guest involved in that situation that might be able to get some information to us about, or, an observation about it before we are joined by Mike Giardi here in about 25 minutes. So let me know about the possibility of that as we're going to now show you something involving Kyle Shanahan that really is next level stuff. And it is a clip that I spotted on Twitter before the show that was spotlighted by a guy named Sage Rosenfels, former NFL and college football quarterback, where Rosenfels, and let me set this up for just a moment. Rosenfels, in the video that you're going to see, he shows you a video of Kyle Shanahan last Sunday during the game against the Packers. The 49ers have the ball. Shanahan is talking to an official, and he's pointing out to the official, the coach of the Niners, the play that's about to come on, they're about to watch, and a penalty that he predicts that impacts one of his players, George Kittle. Then Rosenfels will transition you to the all-22 shot of the field and point out that exactly what Shanahan had pointed out to the official right before the play took place happens, and that there's a penalty called on the play. And so this is how the sausage is made. So let's go ahead and run that clip of Kyle Shanahan, the official, against the Packers, and how he draws the penalty essentially against Green Bay.
In the middle, here's the whole player.
5-yard out route, 85 versus their guy. He's going to go inside and break out. He won't let him out. Watch.
Kyle Shanahan sees man-to-man coverage. He sees man up here, sees man here, man, all right, man down below on Kittle, okay? Here's the extra guy in the middle. Here's the whole player. So you assume he's going to play outside leverage, outside leverage, outside leverage, outside leverage to funnel everybody to this guy, the whole player, and the free safety. So he knows that Kittle has to work him in, try to get him in, and then try to break it out to try to break his leverage. And that's exactly what George Kittle does. Tries to work him in. All right, they're fighting. Then he gets held right there. That's it right there. He gets held by the outside hand of his defender, and that ends up getting a penalty, not just from this guy, but from this guy here, and here's Kyle.
5-yard out route.
Why don't we run that?
Versus their guy.
Now you know.
He's going to go inside and break out. He won't let him out. Watch.
Kyle Shanahan sees man-to-man coverage. He sees man up here, sees man here, man, all right, man down below on Kittle, okay? Here's the extra guy in the middle. Here's the whole player. So you assume he's going to play outside leverage, outside leverage, outside leverage, outside leverage to funnel everybody to this guy, the whole player, and the free safety. So he knows that Kittle has to work him in, try to get him in, and then try to break it out to try to break his leverage. And that's exactly what George Kittle does. Tries to work him in. All right, they're fighting. Then he gets held right there. That's it right there. He gets held by the outside hand of his defender, and that ends up getting a penalty, not just from this guy, but from this guy here, and here's Kyle.
Wow. That's amazing. There he is, talking to the official right before the play, and then he walks to his right. Now, fascinating that that's what coaches do. And I'm going to ask Mike Giardi about this because I want to know, if this is common, whatever the situation is, and if the Giardi thing is common. I'm sorry, if what Shanahan does there is common. I'm going to ask Mike Giardi of NFL Network that. And in the context of Bill Belichick, because I have a feeling that if anybody does something like this a lot or takes advantage of the officiating relationship with officials, things of that nature, what otherwise comes off as something that's somewhat arcane, it's Bill Belichick and his staff. And so we have been efforting obtaining a guest in relation to this big Kansas State-Kansas brawl, as it looks like Matt Lombardo has been called into player availability. Down, of course, you got the Senior Bowl. It's very fluid down there when you're looking at prospects, and he's covering the Giants, trying to make sense of everything. So these things happen. They happen almost every day when you're trying to get the highest profile sports media celebrities who are involved in the most important stories that are going on currently. Well, they're doing their job. The reason that we're talking to them is they've got a job to do that establishes why we would want to have them on. So we are trying to avail ourselves of them while they are in the process of doing their job. So Matt Lombardo has been nice enough to kind of have us in mind. And we had a scheduled time with him earlier this hour, but as so often happens when you're doing these things, we're going to move things around. And also we're talking to Kyle Boone of CBS Sports, who covers college basketball for CBS Sports. And we've been meaning to talk college basketball because it's starting to heat up. There's a lot of interesting, fascinating developments with college basketball, including what we showed you to start this show. And so we may or may not have Kyle Boone on here for a minute or two to talk about that brawl and to kind of give us a little more context on the situation, because I think it's important that things aren't necessarily, well, they never are, as they appear, and what might have motivated DeSouza in this situation, the background of it going in. I'd like to kind of do somewhat of not a deep dive, but at least go underneath the surface and dig a little bit farther down than everybody else is going to do, because all they're going to do, because we don't cover college basketball during the regular season unless we are college basketball centric, and that's all you do. You either do that in the way that's all you do now in media, or you don't cover it. Unless you have a dumpster fire breakout like this. And now all of a sudden, whoa, well, I'd like to know what the hell's going on, that would create something that is kind of a non sequitur that comes out of nowhere. You don't see college basketball players at Allen Fieldhouse playing for Kansas grabbing chairs, grabbing tables, and they want to hit the other player over the head with. So that's why I'd like to know a little bit more about the players that were involved, and maybe if there's a little more than meets the eye. And so we're going to try to do that with Kyle Boone here in a moment. We may or may not do that because we're running up against Mike Giardi as well of NFL Network. So we have a lot going on. But with that in mind, And I want to get to Tom Brady as well, because we have a new development, and I touted this early on in the show. Bob Kraft talking about Tom Brady and the future. I want to go to a clip before I forget. The Houston Sports Awards were last night. Talk about awkward. But of course, when you're in Houston, they aren't awkward. And I caught a glimpse of one of the friends of the show of Sports by Brooks on Fancred, one of our favorites, John McClain down in Houston. And I wish I had some footage of him and how he looked on the red carpet for that event last night down in Houston for the Houston Sports Awards. Jim Crane was named the sports person of the year down in, of all people, right? The owner of the Astros. But I will say, John McClain, who is truly a character, a guy really who should be in Hollywood films, had sunglasses on last night on the red carpet. This is about 3:00 in the afternoon for the Houston Sports Awards. But before we go into Tom Brady and we go into Mike Girardi and possibly talk to Kyle Boone, lest I forget, because I seem like I do that every single show here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. We get things prepared and they don't end up making air because I screwed up or I go off on a tangent or we go to a guest, whatever it is, we don't have time. But I want to run a clip that happened. Well, it's kind of related to Houston, kind of related to the Astros. Actually, it's directly related. It involves Gritty, the mascot of the Philadelphia Flyers, who you may or may not be familiar with. If you're a sports fan, you're watching this, you probably are. That goofy mascot of the Philadelphia Flyers, who's gotten a lot of publicity over the years since they launched him a couple of years ago, provided a tribute to the Houston Astros as he was trying to encourage fans last night at the Flyers game. So go ahead and run that clip of Gritty, the Flyers mascot, and how the Houston Astros act in a second. Take a look at that trash can. So just want to make sure we got that out there before the end of the show, because so many times we don't get to that stuff. The cutting room floor, if you will. And so that's Gritty. And if you didn't get a great glimpse of it, it was Gritty, that mascot, banging a trash can. Let's go Flyers, and encouraging the fans to root for the Flyers and go into that chant. But there was a big sticker on that trash can, a sticker that featured the logo of the Houston Astros, and he was banging on this garbage can, right? In other words, mocking the Houston Astros, who, in implementing their systematic cheating scheme that helped fuel, obviously, their World Series run. How pitiful is it, that whole situation, by the way? They used a trash can and banged on it. I mean, it's just saying these things, describing what they did, and watching Jose Altuve after, the home run that launched the Astros into the World Series, running into the dugout in the clubhouse to grab a shirt to put over his uniform and his jersey to cover up the literal wires he had inside his jersey that perhaps were hanging out of his uniform when he hit that home run because of the signals that he was receiving. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And then Ken Rosenthal asking him why he had done that, and Altuve making up this. And I was watching it. I don't know if you were watching it, Cam Smith, our producer. I was watching the interview. A lot of people were, matter of fact, Ken Rosenthal and Jose Altuve, when Altuve hit that home run, and in the aftermath of it, watching the interview. And, it's, I don't know, it is kind of unbelievable that I remembered it specifically, not because of anything other than the strange response that Altuve gave, and I remember it well. I don't have to be prompted by anything, about how he mentioned his wife and how if his jersey, he wanted to make sure his actual uniform jersey wasn't torn off, right? As it has been, since time immemorial in baseball. And we've seen it particularly in Major League Baseball this season. The Mets come to mind, right? So I remember that he brought up some lame excuse for that. And it's just really striking and unbelievable that would come back in this story. So now we're going to go and talk to Mike Giardi of the NFL Network and grab a hold of some Patriots and grab a hold of some Super Bowl with the guy who I can't think of a better person to talk to, who not only knows the intimates of what's going on with the Pats in the context of New England, specifically on the day-to-day boots on the ground, but also kind of the worldview of what's happening with the Patriots. And Mike, I can't thank you enough. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Excited to be here again.
So let's talk about what's going on. And I don't know if you've seen the video of Robert Kraft. Have you gotten a chance to see that yet?
Yeah.
Now, first off, the fact that he says, what he says, do you think that is something that he's addressing to Brady in that situation? Because it's not necessarily clear. Typical TMZ, but what's your impression of that?
I think there's been a game going on here for quite some time now between the Patriots, Belichick, and Kraft and Brady, where it's almost as if one guy is trying to put it on the other guy, is trying to put it on the other
right.
guy. Like, well, if he leaves, it's not because of me. It's not because of us. We want him to come back. No, I wanted to come back, but they didn't offer me. So I think this continues this sort of game. And I think Robert is continuing to say the same thing. Of course, he wants to bring Tom back, but he's a businessman, and they've long talked about not dedicating too much of the cap to one player. And now we're talking about one player, albeit arguably the greatest quarterback of all time, who's going to be 43 when the season starts next year in August. And he, depending on who you want to believe, has put out sort of feelers that I'm not taking the hometown discount anymore. So they're definitely in this position where there's a lot of leverage, and everything that gets said and done by each one of these guys is going to be written about and talked about, whether the fans like it or not, because I can't think of a more important free agent in Patriot history than this one. And I can't think of a more important free agent this offseason than Tom Brady.
What I try to figure out is what's the bedrock of this situation? What's the real origin of the situation? And is it the bloodless approach of Belichick, the kind of guy who would rather cut you too early than too late, and that he's just applying this to Tom Brady in the way that he's applied it to everybody? Is that really the origin, or what else is there?
Well, I mean, I think part of the, if you want to call it friction, and I think Bill and Tom have actually gotten along better this year and last year than they had in previous years, is just that, Bill wants to do it a certain way. Tom, he's not going to treat Tom any differently than he treats the guy at the back end of the roster, and that has always worked for them. But in the last couple of years, maybe with his wife in his ear, or maybe it's just the guy's evolved, and Tom says, man, you can't treat me like that anymore. Come on, I've sacrificed so much for you, and we've achieved this thing. So I think you have that sort of foundation, and sort of, it bubbles up and builds up over the course of time. And now you say 20 years into this thing, and you're still going to not give me sort of the respect that I want. And when we talk about respect too, respect means money. I don't care what any athlete says. Show me commitment in years and show me money. And he's taken all these hometown discounts. And I think at the end of the day, he will take less than market value because I think he understands the big picture here. And, he'd like to add another Super Bowl ring or two, or however long this can continue to go for. And you can't say, I'm going to take $38 million and that means I'm going to have no new wide receivers or tight ends. But then the question becomes, do they extend him beyond a year, which is what he's wanted for the last couple, and he hasn't gotten it. So I don't know why, from the Patriots' perspective, you would change your approach to Tom, which has been, we're going to go year by year. And now all of a sudden, when he's coming off the season that he's coming off of and he's about to be 43, you'd say, you know what, now's the time to give you that 2 or 3 year commitment. and move forward with you. I don't know why they would change. I think you're going to have that stalemate, and we'll see what happens when they get to March 17th and March 18th when, the calendar year for the league ends, and he can become a free agent for the first time ever.
Visiting with Mike Giardi of NFL Network. What about the performance of Brady, especially towards the end of the year? The Dolphins was a big struggle for everybody, but particularly him. But then a little bit better in the playoffs. I mean, how would you assess his performance? What do you think someone like Belichick is thinking as it pertains to the ability Tom Brady has to be an above average starting quarterback?
I still think they believe he's an above average starting quarterback. And when I watched him, I still believe that. I think injuries certainly impacted him at points this year, especially late in the season with the elbow and the knee, or rather the foot. So that was a problem for him. And is that because he's getting older, or is that just something that happens over the course of time? I think that's something they can answer better than we can. I think at times he makes throws that you say, hey, that was 10 years ago. That was Tom Brady. He just put a ball where only Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes and a few others can put. And then there were times, again, when the elbow was bothering him where he was a little bit off. I think clearly they didn't have enough around him this year. And again, that's probably going to be something that they talk about when they have discussions about a contract, because in years past they would say, Tom, you didn't have Rob Gronkowski for the Super Bowl we won here in 2016, and yet you still won. And you had last year when we won the Super Bowl, Chris Hogan and Philip Dorsett were your number 2 and 3 receivers, and neither one of those guys, or maybe they had one catch between the two of them in the Super Bowl. So you've been able to elevate us and players around you before, and it hasn't been a problem, and that's how we've always operated with you. And now this year we did the same thing, and you couldn't get us over the hump. Offensively, we did struggle. You can look at the numbers and say, I think they were 7th overall in scoring, but that obviously accounts for defensive and special teams coach, which they had a ton of in the beginning of the year. And also just the way the defense played in that first 8 games, they had a lot of short fields. If you go over the last, I think it was 9 games of the season, including playoffs, they averaged 20 points per game, which would be below league average. And that is something that, again, I'm sure they'll discuss when they get to the table.
I'm going to talk to you about the Super Bowl here in a second, but indulge me on this, all right? Because you're on the ground there and nobody knows more about these kinds of situations than you do. But Jimmy Garoppolo, in the context of Tom Brady, you really can't avoid it right now, especially in the high-profile situation Garoppolo is, and the dynamic there with Bill Belichick and Robert Kraft. I mean, what the hell really played out there, and what was Brady's involvement in that situation, if any?
Yeah, I mean, look, they've denied that they had anything to do with the decision. And I know that they talked to him going into that final season about what it would take to keep him around. And I think Jimmy and his agent, Don Yee, who happens to be Tom Brady's agent, were at least willing to listen to it because, hey, whatever. Jimmy knew he was in a great situation with a great coach, a stable coach, one that's churning out Super Bowl victories and Super Bowl appearances year after year, it seems. But I think when he saw Brady in that training camp in 2017 and said, the guy's still going. It's not, there's no difference here. He's as good as he's ever been. And how long do I have to sit here and wait? I mean, the idea for all players is they want to play. And I think at that point, all those discussions and maybe some numbers batted around meant nothing, because at that point, Jimmy said, look, I can't stay. If he's going to stay, I can't stay. And it's not pick one or the other. I understand he's your quarterback, but you got to understand where I'm coming from too. And I think Bill decided, hey, look, we'll ride this thing out until we get closer to the trade deadline. And if Tom stays healthy and continues to perform, then they'll do exactly what they did, which was trade him. And I think, Belichick referenced it, I think, in the immediate aftermath of the trade, where he said, I think we had the best quarterback situation in the National Football League over the last 2.5 years. And there's a point where it's no longer sustainable. And they were at that point where it was no longer sustainable. You don't let Jimmy walk out the door for nothing. And I know there are plenty of people that complain they should have traded him the summer before. And, there was talk about Cleveland maybe offering him a first-round pick and maybe more than that. And they probably could have gotten more. But I think there's also, to Bill's perspective, the importance of having the insurance for the season, at least half that season. And then he really appreciated how Jimmy handled all his business for the 3.5 years he was here. And I think it's pretty clear he wanted him to go to a place and a coach that he respected, and Kyle Shanahan. He loves Mike Shanahan. He and Kyle met after that Super Bowl in 2016 when Atlanta lost a 28-3 lead to talk about what Kyle did and maybe how they could change it. I think there's a lot of respect there. And I think Bill looked at it and said, Jimmy's my guy, and I'm going to send him to a place where he has an opportunity to succeed. And here he is now in the Super Bowl 2.5 years later.
This is with Mike Giardi of NFL Network. I want to get to the Super Bowl now and now talking about Jimmy G in terms of the current 49ers. And the more I look at the 49ers offense and how it kind of harkens me back to the mini dynasty that Mike Shanahan built kind of with that zone blocking scheme and the interchangeable running backs, the success they've had, and Kyle Shanahan's ability to kind of keep the cards close to his vest with Jimmy G, and the fact that Jimmy G has the highest quarterback rating of any quarterback in the fourth quarter of the NFL this season. Yeah. And I'm not even talking about the freaking defense.
Yeah.
I mean, this is starting to, I was originally picking the Chiefs. I flipped in the last 48 hours because I didn't know what the hell I was doing in the first place. But I mean, this 49ers team, it's starting to look a little scary. I mean, but what about that in the context of Jimmy G? Where do you project him?
Look, I think he's had a good year. I think he needed to play football. I mean, you talk about all the things that Bill thought about him, but then when push came to shove, he really played a game and a half for the Patriots before getting traded. Then it was 7 for San Francisco, starts the next year, blows out the knee, first week, second week of the season. I forget, it was pretty early, and then misses that entire time. And I think you saw this year, especially maybe in the first half of the year, he was a little jittery. He needed to settle down. He needed to become more accustomed to the speed. I think in the second half of the year when their defense sort of dropped off, much like the Patriots did from that historic pace they were on, they won some games where it was on Jimmy to make the plays. New Orleans being a great example of that, and that really probably was the game that decided home field advantage, and maybe is why San Francisco is in the Super Bowl, because that was just a shootout, and that was Jimmy outdueling Drew Brees. So I think he's capable of it. I think, obviously in these last 2 playoff games, he's throwing it pretty well against Minnesota. He threw the pick, and then they got conservative, which made sense because they were in control of that game anyway. And then this past weekend, I know there's a ton of, he's a sidecar. He was a passenger. Yeah, he was. And he should be. When you're rushing for 300 yards, why deviate from what you're doing? I think Kyle would have told you that they would have liked to throw it more, but when they were running it as well as they were, you don't do it to prove a point. You say, we're going to keep doing this until you stop us. And they couldn't. And that's a credit to San Francisco's offensive line, the backs, Jimmy getting them in the right calls at the line of scrimmage when they check. And, of course, Kyle just calling a phenomenal game. I mean, that was as impressive a performance as you can have. That offensive line, the tight ends, the way they blocked was something. They absolutely stole the Green Bay Packers manhood in that game.
Visiting Mike Giardi of NFL Network. Now, I think the X factor, at least for me, in the Super Bowl, of Pat Mahomes is the focus of everything, is can the 49ers get pressure on Mahomes? We've seen him scramble. We've seen him improvise. That's a huge strength, but that's not necessarily a given. You never know what's going to happen, and you're not game planning with that in mind. Who can game plan? So what can this San Francisco 49ers team do to get pressure on Mahomes, and do you think that's going to happen?
Well, they're going to get pressure if they're going to do what they're going to do with 4. They're not going to blitz. I don't think you can afford to. I think one of the things that I think even you saw this year with the way Belichick built his Patriots team was sort of with the Chiefs in mind because of their speed at the running back position, wide receiver, tight end, etc. You needed more speed defensively. I think San Francisco has that. But the one thing that I think is sort of come into play, especially here in the playoffs, is now that Mahomes is feeling 100%, he's killing people with his legs. Obviously, the back-breaking touchdown against Tennessee right before the half, that was huge. But how many scrambles where he's picking up 10, 12, 15 yards? And, hey, we've got the coverage downfield. We've taken care of Tyreek Hill. We've taken care of Travis Kelce. And, oh, man, he just broke our back on third down again by running for 15. I think they're going to have to do some spying with him, which, look, when we talk about spying quarterbacks, we usually think of someone like Lamar Jackson, someone who has that game-breaking ability, but Mahomes has been so good at it right now that I think San Francisco is going to have to consider that on a fair amount of plays. And, then the question becomes, that's going to lighten them up in coverage somewhere. Can Kansas City exploit that? That'll be interesting. I think one of the things I noticed about Kansas City the last couple of weeks, they've made a lot of dumb mistakes, penalties, both offensively and defensively. And I don't know that you can afford to do that in this game coming up with how good San Francisco is, both, with their running game on offense and certainly the way they played defensively for the better part of the year.
So which way are you going on this game? 49ers, Chiefs? What are you thinking?
I'm leaning San Francisco right now, but I could get caught up in the Mahomes magic as we get closer and closer to the game, because I just think he's the last couple of weeks, the more you go back and watch the way he's played, he looks like the guy from last year, the MVP, but even better if that's possible. So I know the numbers certainly don't match up this year to what he did last year. Missed a couple games and obviously was hampered a little bit with that knee. But the guy we're seeing now he's got the world in his hands, and he's dictating everything that goes on in games.
Last thing, Vrabes, the guy Mike Vrabel, are the Titans for real?
I think they are. I think they have to answer a couple big questions, though, this offseason, and that's, do you pay Derrick Henry, who you obviously leaned on heavily and became a major part of your identity, especially over the second half of this season? I'm not one who loves to pay running backs big money, and I think you sort of see, obviously the Gurley thing, there were some issues there before, and they sort of, I don't know, they closed their eyes and said it's still going to work, and he's dealt with physical issues that have gotten worse since he signed the big deal. Ezekiel Elliott's a terrific back. I'm still not sure I would have gone that far with him as well. So I think that's a question they have to answer. And the other one is Tannehill. He had a great year, came back to earth, especially in the second half of that game against the Chiefs. And look, if Tom Brady gets the free agency, I'd be shocked if he doesn't take a visit to Nashville and Tennessee. He and Vrabel go back a long way. They were teammates, they're friends. And you put them on that team, do they vault to number 2 on the list of AFC teams behind Kansas City? I think they probably do. So that'll be something to keep an eye on.
Outstanding stuff, man. You are the best. Thank you so much, Mike, for all the intel.
No problem. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That's Mike Giardi of NFL Network, and we're going deep into the Tom Brady situation, particularly indulging us, a guy who is on the ground, in the trenches, in New England, but also gives you the entire picture. And one or two things that really stuck out is some things that he volunteered in particular. And when you look at the Super Bowl and you're trying to think about what's going to play into who wins, who loses, two things. Number one, he mentioned sloppiness of the Chiefs with the penalties. And, in the context of the performance of Jimmy G, even though we don't necessarily see the high-flying numbers and all the passing, he's been very effective. And I told you earlier, made a big deal out of it. Quarterback rating in the fourth quarter, number 1 in the league this year. So that tells me the guy can throw the ball. The guy can make plays. But right now, the function of that 49ers offense, the run game, and just as importantly, and this is the other thing that stuck out with what Mike said, the ability to audible, the ability to get the 49ers into the right play. And when you see the breakdown of the 49ers in particular in the last couple of weeks throughout the playoffs, that's really the big strength that Jimmy G brought to the table. And so you can look at those two things, the composure that it takes for Jimmy G to do that, right? And then, of course, a lack of composure on the side of the Chiefs. It's remarkable, but in placing that offense, particularly the run game, in the context of, and I know it's been a while, say the least, but in the context of what his father did with the zone blocking scheme they're using now, and you see Mostert, actualize that. You've seen it with other backs with the Niners to have huge games, right, out of nowhere. Well, that's what was happening back with the Broncos. You see that success that's already there, already established. And then you see the success of Jimmy Garoppolo and his ability to have the composure that it takes to get the offense in the right play. And that's something that we don't see, we don't know about unless you have a deep dive film session. All we see is, he only threw 5 passes. What the hell? He's not that's a very small part of it. So the more I think about the 49ers in this game, and of course the defense that they have, and you mentioned the one thing that's really, to me, the number one key to this game, God knows I'm going to say that every damn day leading up to the game, is what Girardi said. They're going to have to spy Mahomes. And when he said that, it's not that it surprised me. Everybody kind of has to do that. But if there's a defense, you would think that would not have to do that. And so I think back to that 27-yard run late in the first half against the Titans. And, the Titans were spying Mahomes like everybody else. They were caught well downfield, double covering 2 wideouts and Kelsey, which created, the long run, extended the run, I think is the word to use. But there was a spy right there to make the tackle. He just missed the tackle, the linebacker for the Titans. I mean, if the 49ers are in that spot, they're in the same spot as the Titans. And I'm not so sure that they will be. I'm not saying that they're not going to spy. I'm saying that the discipline that it takes, the ability of those defensive players for the 49ers to have that transcendent defense, that's different than the Titans. They're a much better defensive team. And as I mentioned to Mike, we can talk about his ability to improvise Mahomes and break off these long runs. But as an I know we always say, well, the defense can't scheme for that. They can't. Well, neither can the offense. You're not guaranteed that he's going to, get a first down every time something breaks down. I know he feeds off that. But when you look at, and the reason I'm bringing up pressure over and over and over again is, and I think some people out there watching this might be thinking, well, Brooks, that's what he does. He gets pressure and he makes plays. Right. But if you look at him statistically, when he gets pressure, specifically, his performance numbers go way down. They're not what you think they are, especially in the pass game where they plummet. Now, I recognize a lot of that is him running. So his numbers passing wouldn't be all that great necessarily. But I think we might be overrating something like improvisation of Mahomes as it pertains to running. You can't count on that. And on the passing side of it, when he's done the same thing, passing, he's not been effective. We've seen it. All signs point right now to the 49ers. So before we go, and I want to make sure that, let's see, before we go, and I appreciate you hanging out with us throughout the course of the show, doing a lot of NFL, a lot of Super Bowl deep dive with one of the best, Mike Giardi. I know I promoted this video involving Robert Kraft and Tom Brady. We haven't run it yet. Thank you so much to our producer, Cam Smith, for mentioning that. So now let's run that video when Bob Kraft was asked yesterday about the situation with Tom Brady, where Bob Kraft is on it. And I'll tell you briefly what I think after we show you the video, which is vintage TMZ.
All right, Bob, take care, man. Mr. Kraft, how's everything going?
Bob, please, Bob, please.
Bob, how's everything going?
Please, Bob,
what about Tom? Tom can stay in New England. All right, Bob, take care, man. Are we gonna keep Tom in New England, Bob? Are we gonna keep Tom in New England, Bob?
There we go. We got it. We plan to. So, honest to God, and Mike Giardi is as well informed on the subject as anybody. He said it really, he made it sound like it was a hot potato. Nobody wants to touch it. Belichick. We've run the video and audio of him at press conferences, and most recently after their last game. So you're well informed if you follow this show. But to me, Kraft is a bystander here. He's just going to do what Belichick tells him to do. That's it. So why wouldn't he say that? It is notable, though, that he would say anything in that situation. But I don't think Bob Kraft is someone you don't even need to talk to him in this situation. Because if Brady was going to get a gesture, if he was going to get another year, 2-3 years, if he was going to get more representative money, he would have it by now if it was Bob Kraft. This is a Bill Belichick decision. Also notable, Giardi mentioned Garoppolo and Brady. I asked him about, did Brady play any role in that situation? Notable that they both have Don Yee as an agent, right? And that's something that I don't want to go on and on about, but I think that could be a factor here in Jimmy G moving on and how he moved on. But interesting that Giardi, he didn't even entertain the idea that it was a power play and Brady helped to force Garoppolo out, which of course, is kind of the reason I asked him, but he didn't even reference this, which tells me it didn't happen. If anybody knows, it would be Mike Girardi. So we're going to bring Matt Lombardo back, hopefully from the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama, because I definitely want to have Matt back on, one of the best on our show and anywhere covering the NFL and the Giants. We'll do that later on this week. And Kyle Boone covers college basketball so well for CBS Sports. We'll bring him hopefully onto the show in the next couple of days, if not tomorrow, to talk more about what happened with Kansas and Kansas State, what we showed you. And we gave you an in-depth look on it, including all the necessary questions that needed to be asked of Bill Self and Bruce Weber. But that's going to do it for today's show. I'd like to thank our producer, Cam Smith, everybody at Fancred for making it happen. And this is Brooks Melchior live from Los Angeles saying so long. This has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.